all be seated. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday I gave you the bulk of the final jury instructions, and at this point we'll hear closing argument from counsel. The state having the burden of proof goes first, but they also get the last word in a rebuttal comment. So, Mr. Grinke.
My voice is giving out a little bit, so hopefully we make it through this with plenty of water. As I told you last Tuesday in opening arguments, we're here to seek the truth of what happened to Barbara Kendhammer. And the truth does not support the defendant in any way in this case. I also told you in opening arguments that I have a hard job and I accept that responsibility, but I have a hard job convincing you that somebody that people know and love and care for could do something so heinous. And even though I don't think we have every answer, because one person involved in this has passed away, and the other person has done nothing but throw up smoke screens, we have enough answers to find this defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I say my job is hard because we want to believe the best in people. We want to believe that our communities are safe. We want to believe that people that we know, that we see, that are just like us, can't do things that are horrible. Because we want to be safe, and we want our family safe, and we want to be able to know and predict who the dangerous people are and who the dangerous people aren't. Unfortunately, we don't all live in a safe world. For the most part, La Crosse is a very safe area, but sometimes bad things happen, and it's our duty to do what we can to hold those people accountable. We think that if people don't have a violent record, or if they don't look scary, or if they're not angry all the time, we must know them. We can predict their behavior. But we also know from our own experiences there are plenty of times when people act out of character, when people surprise us, when we hear somebody's getting a divorce and we think, we just saw them last weekend and everything seemed fine. We find somebody's been cheating. In the news, we find a celebrity or a TV personality or a sports member saying inappropriate things, doing inappropriate things, and we think we know people, and we find out we all have secrets, and things always happen behind closed doors that not everybody knows. But that's not really the question for us today. We have to accept the fact that we are here to do a simple job, but a very important job, and that's to find the truth. The truth of what happened on September 16th. Not to judge the marriage of Todd and Barbara Kendhammer, not to say whether or not he's always been a violent man or always been a bad man. Sometimes people can have two sides of them, and sometimes good people do bad things. Sometimes bad people do nice things. So it's not a case where we have to analyze the entire life of these two people and try to figure out what we can predict. Our job is to look at what happened and find the truth. There's a famous quote from a Sherlock Holmes story that says, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And even though it might be unlikely to think that somebody could do something like this, when you eliminate everything else, what you're left with is the truth. If you believe that the defendant lied about what happened and did things to cover this up, he's guilty. It's really that simple. If you believe Randy Erler, a man going to work to do some drywall, minding his own business, if you believe that what he saw is what he saw, and what he didn't see, the defendant's guilty because he covered it up. If you believe the defendant put the pipe through the window instead of this mysterious truck, then the defendant's guilty. At the scene that Friday morning on September 16th, almost immediately, the defendant said things that we later found out were not true. He talked about a flatbed truck in detail. He said Barb had to be at work by 8:30. We know that's not true. He said he was driving to Holman to get a truck from a guy named Justin that he works with, and the keys would be in the truck at the end of the driveway. We know that's not true. He said a pipe came off a truck, rolled off from up on high, that the truck was carrying something. We know that's not true. He said he hit the windshield with both fists, more to the left than the right, but hurt his knuckles from hitting the windshield. We know that's not true. If the police had accepted his lies at that moment, if the patrol officers had been working alone and saw an accident and thought his story was weird, but it's an accident, he would have gotten away with it. But the police did their job. They checked it out. They investigated. They investigated his story. They looked at things, and they even looked for things that would help him if they were true. From the beginning, the Sheriff's Department was determined to find the truth. And every step of the way, when they found out something the defendant said was not true, they would go back to him, they would try to corroborate it and find even more things that were not true. And the police did a lot of work in this case. Neighborhood canvases, they used drones, you heard all the search warrants that they did looking for any evidence. They used the FBI, they used the crime lab, you heard they were searching that swamp for any evidence. And all the while they were doing all that work, going outside, going to get surveillance videos, going to the swamp, they're just looking for the truth, whatever the truth might be. They have no vested interest in convicting somebody who's not guilty. They had no personal animosity. They were investigating a case. And it wasn't just the Sheriff's Department. You were from the Dane County Medical Examiner's Office with Dr. McCubbin, the State Patrol, the FBI, all these people trying to figure out what happened to Barbara Kendhammer. His lies continued throughout the case, and his lies continued at trial when he testified and told you things that we found out were not true. The first things after the scene that the police discovered wasn't adding up was the autopsy. A couple days after the incident, thankfully they did an autopsy and didn't just assume it was a traffic accident, and Dr. McCubbin noticed things weren't adding up. The amount of injuries that she received, the location of the injuries and the type of injuries do not line up with a pipe in any way. They do line up with a beating, a fatal beating. She had an abrasion to her left temple. She had a bruise between her eyebrows. She had a bruise on the top of her forehead, the bruise on her right jaw, a bruise below her right earlobe, a bruise to her left cheek, a bruise to the inside of her upper lip with the teeth not hurt, a bruise to her lower lip on the inside, but the teeth were not hurt. She had a nose fracture. She had laceration to the left side of the back of her head where there was a skull fracture. She had 2 lacerations to the right side of her back head, a laceration on her forehead, abrasions on the front of her neck that are consistent with fingernails, not a mug, a bruise on the back of her neck, cricoid cartilage fracture inside the neck, abrasion on her left clavicle, a bruise on her right and left clavicle, a bruise on her right lower back, a bruise on her left lower back, a bruise on her upper back, abrasions on her left thumb, a bruise on her left hand, a bruise on her left forearm, bruise on her left upper arm, abrasions on her right hand, 2 abrasions on her right ring finger, an abrasion on the right index finger, a bruise on the back upper arm on the right elbow, bruises on the left mid-lower leg, bruise on the left lower leg, bruise on the back of the left calf, the center of the right thigh, the right groin, 2 bruises above her knee, her right shin, and her right calf. This is a woman that was in a fight. This is a woman that was fighting for her life. This is a woman that was getting beat all over her body, her face, her head, her neck, in all different areas and directions. Not consistent with getting hit by a pipe and flailing in the car for a couple seconds and hitting right, left, top, back, leg, arm. Not consistent with that at all. And what did the other guy in the fight look like? That was the other guy in the fight. Her husband, Todd Kendhammer. With his shirt stretched out, blood on his shirt, sweating, excitable. Cuts on his left hand and his knuckles. You notice one cut on his left thumb, not explained by hitting glass. You have to hit it so evenly at the same time that all 8 knuckles and a thumb will be cut with one punch. A man who had scratches to the left side of his neck, which look exactly like a fingernail scratch would look. Fingernail scratches to the right side of his body, his neck, and then his chest. You have one person scratched up, bloody knuckles, the other person with bruises all over her body. That's a fight. It's exactly what it would look like if people were in a fight. One of the other things that the defendant said right away at that scene when they were asked where he was going was he was going to see Justin Heim in Holman. He's going to get a truck from him, but change his story a lot. Whether he called him, whether he didn't call him, whether it had been a month ago, whether he's looking for it the night before, whether he lives on Scheffelbein Hill, whether it's Long Coulee. The defense would have you believe that that's just a product of being in trauma and not remembering things. That's how people lie when they know the truth isn't going to help him. He's trying to make up a story as he goes. The only person he can think of that lives in that direction is Justin Heim at a time. But he wasn't going to see Justin Heim. So he's trying to explain, well, how are you going to get this truck? And as the officers ask simple questions like, how are you going to get there? How are you going to get the truck? How would you know you're coming? His story has to keep filling in more details, and his lies are exposed rather quickly if you listen to the interviews. When he's confronted about that in the interview, he says, well, it wasn't Justin Heim. I told you I didn't do any work for Justin Heim. It was his friend that was asking for this. The police, doing their job, talked to Justin Heim, who says, I didn't need a windshield. It was a guy named Ben Paff. The police go and talk to Ben Paff, who says, I didn't know Todd Kendhammer. I talked about a windshield in May, but I don't need one, and I never contacted him to get one, and Todd Kendhammer doesn't know where I live. That's a story he was given back then. Come to trial, he knows that can't work, because he knows the police have talked to Justin Heim and Ben Paff, and they're going to say there's no way he was coming to get a truck from us. So now where was he going? He throws out the name Jerry Logan, or Jared Logan. Jared Logan comes in and says, my truck was outside like it always is. I know Todd Kendhammer, but he wasn't coming to get my truck. I was home that day. He'd already driven past Logging's house at the time this incident happened, and he didn't need a windshield. His windshield had a problem that was fixed in 2014. This slide tells you that he wasn't going in that direction to do anything other than try to find a way to hide what he'd done to Barbara Kendhammer. He gave a story for 3.5 hours that was lie after lie, and the police were telling him they knew he was lying, and he still stuck to it. He didn't say, I'm tired, I really can't think right now. He didn't say, I'm overwhelmed, I really don't remember what happened. He got adamant that he was 100% in the story, that he wasn't going to snap, whatever that means. The investigator said, we don't want you to snap, we want the truth. And they gave him options. Do you black out? Were you drinking? Do you use drugs? There's some way we can find the truth. And that's all the investigators wanted. Tell us the truth. And he kept saying, I didn't do anything wrong. In that interview, he again described this flatbed in detail. Darker, 2000 area, dark green. Wasn't pulling a trailer. He had something in there because it came off the top. It was higher up where it comes off the truck. The truck wasn't that tall, just the truck itself. It wasn't down here when I first seen it, it was up. It's not like it came off and bounced off the side of the truck. It came off the top of the truck. He also said that no one would come help him, which we know is now a lie. The police are asking him how you got her out of the vehicle, because they're trying to explain these injuries. They're trying to understand, did something happen he's not telling us? Was somebody else there? Did something happen between them? What happened? Was it an accident? Was it a fight that went too far? Tell us the truth. So in asking how he got out of the vehicle, his response was, I've never, ever in 28 years, never touched her or grabbed her or raised my voice with her. That came out of nowhere. That's a guilty conscience. It's exactly what he did, was grab her, hit her, yell at her, and he brought that up. The police didn't put that into his mind. So at this point, the police realized he's never going to tell us the truth, so we need to work harder to find it. My grandfather always told me you can't trust a man who lies to you. you can't trust this man who lied to you. I'm going to go through some of the things that he lied or covered up about. A pipe coming off the truck. I think almost all the experts that testified agree that that's not possible. Physics doesn't allow it. Now he says, because he knows that, now he's not sure. Could have been a bird, could have kicked up off the ground, a truck could have kicked it up running by, but he never said that before. It was always a pipe coming off a truck. Even the defense expert agreed there's no way for a pipe to just move on its own. There's got to be some force applied. There's no bumps on the road. There's no turns. There's no stops. There's no swerves. There's no reason for a pipe to move sideways 10 feet over another lane and hit the passenger side of the vehicle. Even Mr. Mishulam agreed that this would be at most a 30, 40 mile per hour impact, not a 100 mile per hour impact. He said he thought now, at first it might have been a bird. He didn't see it at first, and then as he saw it, it was coming through the windshield. You all know as you've been driving, you've had things either hit your car or come close, or you've seen birds that just barely get out of the way. There's no way that a person could see something they think is a bird, react the way he reacted by punching at it, only because at the last second, last millisecond, he saw it was a pipe. And instead of freezing or just jumping or reacting by putting your hands up or over, forming a fist, leaning forward, leaning to the right, up under the rearview mirror with your left hand extended, slightly cocked and hitting upward, you have very little force in this punch. And even with a lot of adrenaline, you're not going to be able to hit the windshield that hard, leaning that far forward. The pipe flap that was left behind in the windshield, even Mr. Mishulam agreed that the left side and bottom is cut first and the flap is left on the right, meaning the pipe came from the passenger side into the car. Consistent with somebody standing at the passenger side and punching it in. The left side would hit first, towards the right. Now Mr. Mishulam said you could put it in any angle, but I don't think anyone's going to come like this and try to put it in the other way. The pipe didn't fly through the windshield. It was put there by the defendant. The defendant lied to you when he talked about this phone call to Justin Heim on September 22nd. The day he came in to talk to the police, they called him at about 8:45 in the morning. He said that he was alone. He had Jordan's phone because the police still had his phone. He was alone. He was the only one using it. He drove down here alone. He had Jordan's phone in the interview with him. He didn't know how to turn it off. He didn't know how to silence it because it wasn't his phone. Jordan's phone called Justin Heim that morning between the time of 8:45, where the defendant gets a call, and the time he gets to the sheriff's department and starts the interview, which was 9:10. Why would the defendant at that moment be calling Justin Heim? Other than trying to see if he can get an alibi. See if Justin, his friend from work, will back him up. See if he'll confirm that in fact he had a windshield that needed doing. We also know it's a lie because Justin called him back, thought it was Jordan. Left a message, said, hey, I was at work. If you need something, let me know. It's probably one of the rings that we saw while we were watching that video. The defendant didn't call him back. Didn't call him back and say, sorry, I dialed you by accident. Didn't call him back and say, this is what I was calling about. I just talked to the sheriff's department. They're telling me that you didn't need a windshield. I thought I was going to your house that day or your friend's house that day. Can you help me remember? Can you help me figure it out? He doesn't call back to do that because he knows he's guilty. He knows that that lie's not going to work. The 8:30 work time. Barbara's work records show she always worked at 8. That's September, every day, 8 o'clock, every day. Very punctual, very good worker. There's no way that on that Friday she would just think she had to work at 8:30 instead of 8. She knew what time she had to work at. She gets a call from work at 8:02, meaning they expected her there at 8. And the defendant said on the stand he has no explanation for that because it's a lie. Because something was going wrong that kept her from calling into work or going to work at 8 like normal. And it was a defendant who was beating her at that time. He lied to the police about that. He knew he had to say 8:30 because at 8 he's already out on this road. He was hoping they wouldn't check it out. And if they hadn't, he'd probably believe he knows what time his wife would work at, but he had no way to explain that. This flatbed truck, he didn't just say it looked like a truck, I'm not sure anything else about it, it was too fast. he adds details to the story. 3/4 ton, makeshift steel flatbed on it, 18-inch to 2-foot high metal sides, 2000 model, dark in color. Now, it's not seen on surveillance video anywhere. I understand, could have pulled into a driveway. There are some other roads, but most people coming down Highway M towards West Salem are going to West Salem. And the police looked, and that would have helped their story. They weren't just collecting evidence to say he's guilty. If they had found that truck, that would have helped him. They didn't see it at Quick Trip. They don't see it at the intersection of Highway 16 and M. The Wild Winds Ranch is the best we have. We can't improve it anymore. We can't find any video that we don't have, but we did find that. And Captain Zimmerman explained what he saw on that. We believe the Kendhammer vehicle goes by at about 7:57. It's confirmed by the Google dashboard data that we got later on, and it makes sense with the timeline of being on Bergen Coulee at about 8. If that's a Kendhammer vehicle, the truck going south that the defense says you really can't make what it is only 10 seconds later. So that couldn't be the truck that was passing that dropped a pipe, because that would mean he was driving with a pipe in the car for another mile to get up to Bergen Coulee. So that truck really doesn't matter. About a minute or two later, there's a van and a car that drive south, but it's definitely not a truck. And so there is no truck that we see driving past that location. The defendant was switching his work hours that weekend. He gave 2 reasons, one on direct exam and added another one on cross. He's helping out a friend, and also he was having a problem with a guy at work. What's amazing that this tight-knit family that talked all the time, that talked about everything, that was on the same page and everything, nobody else knew the defendant was switching work that night. He says Barb knew. Michael Service that morning still thought Todd would be working that Friday during the day. He didn't know that he was switching to nights. Jordan thought he had the weekend off of vacation, didn't know he was switching nights. Dave Adams thought he had the weekend off, didn't know he'd be working nights. Jessica didn't know that they were switching. So how is it possible? This is a big switch. This isn't just going to work one day. This is a 12-hour shift. Your whole life is going to change. Your sleep patterns, when you're available for people, what you're going to be doing during your non-work hours, it's going to change. It's a big deal. And he didn't tell anybody. And if he told Barb she didn't tell anybody, what's going on at work? Well, your dad's going to have to switch shifts. He's going to be working nights now again. Nobody knew that. I don't think Barb knew that. If she knew it, other people would have known it. If they really talked as much as they said, constantly, every day, that seems to be a problem in this family. Todd had already lost a couple of jobs. He got fired at A1. He couldn't work at Glass Service Center because he couldn't get along with the bosses. He went into business with a partner for himself. That didn't work out. And now again, he's getting disciplined at work for calling in sick too much. He's about to. And he's got to switch shifts because he didn't get along with somebody. Is Barb mad that once again, we're supposed to be camping? I don't want you working nights and weekends, and now you tell me you're not going to be camping this weekend, you're working 12-hour shifts? He said that he was driving around Thursday night looking for this house. Now he says he wasn't or doesn't remember. He says he started CPR right away. His story is that after backing into that ditch, the first thing he needed was to get out of the car. That would not be the first thing that you need to do. You need to first look at her and find out where she's injured. Is she bleeding from the head, the chest, the neck? He always says he doesn't remember. I think that would be burned into your mind. He forgets a lot of things that happened that day that I think most people would say would be burned in their memory forever. Where the pipe hit her, where she was injured, what was going on, how he got in the ditch, all that is just very vague because he's lying. So instead of checking her, even feeling for a pulse, seeing where she's injured, stopping the bleeding, calling 911, he just gets out of the car, runs around the back of the car, he says, and has to yank her out so fast. He says he did CPR right away, but he waited somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes to call 911. And it's a long time. To sit quietly and think about what you can do in 3 minutes is a long time. That's a boxing round. How many punches can be thrown in 3 minutes? A lot. How much damage can be done in 3 minutes? A lot. How much time goes by in 3 minutes as you're trying to do CPR and not calling 911? He wasn't doing CPR. He calls 911, says he's going to do CPR. He realizes the blood that he's caused, it's by his back tire, is there, he's got to move her. She's on a flat surface there. Her chest is flat just through the compressions. You don't have to turn 180 degrees around and now put her up a hill on an incline where it's really hard to do CPR. And when Brandon Hauser arrives, it's not in a good location for CPR, and the defendant's at her feet. So he stopped doing compressions for some reason. He wasn't trying to save her life. He waited until she was dead, she had no pulse, and now he starts his plan to cover this up. He testified a number of times that the pipe was in the way. He said the door kept closing on me and the pipe was in the way. You can see from this picture, the door stays open on its own. And if you're standing there on that bank with your back to the door, it would stay open. Just lean against it, it's open, no problem. How does it keep getting in your way? He kept saying the pipe was in the way, the pipe was in the way, the pipe was in the way, and that's why he had to take it out of the car. But he asked a simple question, in the way of what? He has no answer. She's in the passenger seat, pipe is above her, take it and move it out. Take it and push it to the side. It's not pinning her in, she's not impaled by it. That never happened, he made that up. He had to take it out and throw it. He had to take it out of that windshield and throw it behind that car. There's two things about this pipe that aren't disputed. 53 inches long, it's a long pipe. 10 pounds, relatively heavy to lift with one arm. Mr. Meshulam said that in order to accomplish this bulge and fulcrum crack that he talks about, you have to take the pipe straight out and only at the last second bend it to cause that bulge. This pipe is in the windshield, say halfway. You could just reach in the car and push it out, but he didn't do that. He says he took it, say by the middle, standing between the door and the car, and drew it out straight. Your arm's not long enough, and it's heavy. And at the last second, then turn it. If it's in further, maybe more where the back seat would be, impossible to pull it out with your arm without bending it right away. If it's only in a little bit, it's heavy for one, and also it's not in the way. Even with Mr. Meshulam's testimony, I don't think there's a way to pull that pipe straight out of the car with one hand. And then if you did, you get it out far enough, you just let it drop. You don't throw it back behind the car. Compared to standing next to the car, taking the pipe, hitting it once, as Mr. Bates said, you can hit a windshield once and not break it. Hitting it again harder, the dirt's deposited from the pipe on the seat that's empty because Barb's outside the car. Taking it out and then throwing it. Because you're not thinking straight exactly what it should look like when there's a pipe coming through the windshield. Much more reasonable than Mr. Meshulam's theory of pulling a 53-inch pipe straight out of a windshield. He said he was yelling for help and nobody would come and stop him. Randy Erler drove by and heard nothing. Randy Erler is one of those people that testified in this case that has absolutely no reason to lie, didn't volunteer to be here, doesn't do this for a living. He's a drywaller going to a job, and he says he went by between, say, 8:01 and 8:03 because he got to his job site at 8:02 to 8:04, and he sees a car in a ditch but no people around. He doesn't stop, which I don't think is that uncommon. How many of us drive by and see a car in a ditch, and if you see no people, we keep on going. We live in a little bit of a selfish society, but if you saw people, you might stop. So Randy, making that turn, had plenty of time to see that car from the side, see the windshield from the side to see if it's bulging out or broken, saw the driver's side window down, saw the passenger door open, saw through the windshield, and didn't see anybody, and didn't hear anybody. All the defendant had to do was yell for help or move a little bit. The defendant said the scratches his neck were from working with glass. We know that's a lie. He doesn't work with glass. This slide shows a couple of things. The dirt on the seat that I contend would come from the pipe coming through the windshield when Barb was not there, depositing glass and dirt on the seat. If you would drag somebody out of that seat, that dirt would be wiped away or at least disturbed. It looks like it's freshly deposited. It also shows you how far back that seat is from the dash. Barb, not a large woman, sitting in that seat, bending over at the waist, would not hit her chin or mouth on the dash. She might miss it entirely, or maybe the forehead, but the idea that she was trapped between the dash and the cup and her head does not make sense. There was no glass or dirt in the map pocket, and you can see at the bottom of that screen how much dirt and glass there was deposited, and there's not a speck in that map pocket. That door was open when that pipe came through that windshield. Now, I told you in opening statement that we would not present to you a motive because we cannot read the defendant's mind. We can't get inside what was happening that day. And when I heard everybody talking about the perfect marriage, every marriage has its ups and downs, and everybody has secrets. Some more disturbing than others, but everybody's got things they don't tell other people. Kids don't tell their parents everything, parents don't tell their kids everything. That's pretty normal. And how many times has it happened when somebody tells you something that is surprising? We're getting a divorce. I didn't know there was a problem going on. Sometimes you do, but many times you don't. People are breaking up. People have been cheating on each other. People are sick. I just saw them last week. They seemed happy. What's going on? That's pretty common. I also think the fact that everybody puts so much pressure on Barb to have this perfect marriage, it becomes a little harder to tell people it's not perfect. When people put you up on a pedestal and talk about how, oh, he takes care of you, he holds your hand, he's always calling you, he's always texting you, he must really care about you, it's a little harder to give people some bad news and say, maybe it's not all so rosy. When you look at the phone records that were shown by the defense and the text messages, we only saw a little bit, but there's a lot going in one direction. He would drop her off at work. He would call her at the first break. One of the texts said, call me when you get done with work. He would call her after work. He would come home from deer camp to be with her. At some point, the woman doesn't have a choice but to say she's in a happy relationship because he's always on her, always contacting her, always with her, and doesn't give her a breath. There were texts about a check. We don't know what it's about, but there was something about my check is whatever amount, no worries. There was a text about an unpaid bill from January showing up in September. There were unpaid bills in the car. There were some things going on in that marriage. And again, we don't have to present motive. This fight could have been about anything, but it was a fight. And that's why it's not an element of the crime, because it's hard to get inside somebody's mind. We have to prove it was intentional, not premeditated. The law doesn't require that there has to be planning, premeditation, forethought. It does not require that the intent existed for any length of time. It doesn't mean it was thought about, considered, brooded over. It could have been just for a minute. At the moment he was doing this, he was intending her to die. We know that because of his acts before the murder, during the murder, and after the murder. He took her to a place that wasn't where she was supposed to go. He wasn't taking her to work. Something's going on where he's trying to hide her from other people. He didn't take her back to the house. He didn't take her to work. He took her to a side road off the main road. During the act, he didn't call her for help from Mr. Erler. He didn't call 911 right away. So this is not an accident. This is not something where she fell and hit her head. That's not what's happening. And most importantly, afterwards, he's lying and he's covering up. The only reason to do that is if you cause the injuries. An innocent accident, the truth would be easy to tell. Things like where you were going and what time does she work at are easy when it's an honest accident, when you're innocent. Your story doesn't change when you're innocent. The defense presented 3 experts, and I don't think any of them had a whole lot of credibility. Mr. Mishulam, I explained how his theory doesn't exactly make a lot of sense. He believed that a crack went from one impact area, got lighter, then stronger, and then ended mysteriously at the same point where another impact happened later. He thought that Mr. Erler would have the sun in his eyes on a rainy day. When I showed him the pictures that were dark and then light because of a change in the camera, he thought it could get that light in a matter of seconds. He thought the sun might peek through the trees and might be in the eyes of somebody. This is not a scientific opinion. These are just guesses. This is somebody getting paid to come up with excuses for why the defendant might be innocent. His report was wrong about what the police theory even was. It's not his job to analyze crime scenes. He wouldn't tell you how much he got paid for this. I'm not arguing he shouldn't get paid. People should get paid for their work. And I understand you might hire an expert that doesn't work for the government or a crime lab. They should get paid. But you should know how much they get paid so you can analyze their credibility, is my point. And he didn't know how much he's getting paid. I don't know how many self-employed people have no idea how much a landscaping job's gonna get them, or the remodel job. They just say that, I don't know how much I'm getting paid for this, I'm just doing it. Why he had to hide that fact, I don't know. Dr. Bates disagreed with Mr. Mishulam about the impacts, but then changed his opinion that he'd written in his report. He only looked at 3 injuries, ignoring the rest. His opinion is that the right injury happened first because Barb bent down so fast that she bent faster than the pipe could fly at her, hit her in the back of the right head, then the back of the left head by skipping. And he agreed it did not come off a truck, but had no other explanation other than a lot of maybes. Dr. Cook had the injury wrong. He went back and forth on whether the left or the right was caused first, and then said he got his left and rights mixed up. He said the mug caused the abrasions on her neck, which I still don't understand how that would happen. He said the injury in the left happened first, disagreeing with Dr. Bates. His most ridiculous claim was that the windshield would have had friction to stop the pipe. So a pipe coming through the windshield at whatever speed, at this weight, would just stop in midair before it hits the back of the seat, because the back of the seat had no damage on it. He said if this were a beating, it would have been a rage beating. Yes, it probably was a rage beating. I believe Todd Kendhammer lost control, snapped, beat his wife to death for some reason that he's not telling us. None of the experts could explain how this pipe would stop. If this pipe is coming with such force to crack a skull, but it's not a direct blow because it's not a circular pattern, the pipe would just stop there and keep hanging out the windshield. Physics doesn't allow that. So what did happen? What truth can we come up with? First, they were driving to work. Barb was dressed for work that day. She plans to go to work by 8 o'clock. He was going to drive her to work, but something happened. I don't know if it was a stress over the camping, work, bills, the change in hours. She said something he didn't like. He said something she didn't like. Something happened. Because they start out from their house at the cluster of dots that we saw on the Google dashboard, and they went towards this Barb Thompson house for a few minutes at least. 7:49 approximately. She's already later than she usually is. Usually by this time she's already called her mom, she's on her way to work talking to her mom. So they're already running behind schedule, and they decide to stop then to check on a property. Doesn't have to be done right then. Todd could have done it later. And they sit for a couple of minutes. Todd testified she stayed in the car by herself. She doesn't call her mom like she did every other morning that fall at 7:45, 7:50-ish. She could have, except the phone was in the back seat, in her purse, on the back seat. I know everybody's different about where they keep their phones, but for one like Barb, who's used to calling her mom and used to talking on the phone while she drives, to not at least have the phone near her is extremely odd. It's in the back seat, not even on the back floor, in a spot where she couldn't reach it if it did ring. They then start driving down south towards West Salem. At this point, something's already going wrong. She hasn't called the school, she hasn't called her mom. The fight's already happening, she's already bleeding in the car. He's deciding I can't take her home, Jordan's there, we're gonna drive somewhere else. So they drive across Asmus Road, they drive past Wild Wings at 7:57:20, which is almost exactly the time that the surveillance video showed. Mr. Logging lives right in here, he said, right across from the Wild Winds. They're going past that. So the idea that they're looking for his truck is another lie. About 8 o'clock, they're on Bergen Coulee Road. Now 8 o'clock, she's supposed to be at work, so something's going wrong. Why do they turn onto this road? They're fighting, she's bleeding, they're arguing. He's gonna get off a main road and go somewhere where he can control the car better. They have to stop the car, and the car ends up in the ditch. He has no explanation for that. But for the car to travel the 100 yards down that road and then stop, if he put it in reverse, it would back up straight. He's going straight down the road. If it drifted, it might drift a little bit to the right or left, and it might drift into the ditch. But to get that sharp of a turn in the ditch, somebody grabbed the wheel. Someone had to turn the wheel hard to the right to get it there. The mirror is, I think, dislodged because there's a fingerprint on it as if somebody had straightened it out again. The sunglasses are knocked out of the top onto the floor. There's a struggle going on inside that car. And we know she's bleeding in the car. And because the glass is spread out over the seat, we know the glass didn't come in while she was sitting there, because just like the blood, it wouldn't be on that seat. She's not flailing because there is no blood spatter on the window where her head would have been close to. There's no glass in the map pocket. There is blood on the floor, a large pool of blood. There is blood in the console, again, a drip pattern, a number of drips that are happening. And the seatbelt is also saturated. Now that's 3 locations with a fair amount of blood, and Mr. Kendhammer wants you to believe that that happened in the couple of seconds that it took for him to turn right and end up in the ditch. At some point she's over the floor, maybe trying to keep the seat clean, bleeding out of her nose, the broken nose onto the floor. At another point, she's leaning over the console, again dropping blood onto that envelope. At another point, she must be leaning back because the seatbelt is saturated in blood. That much blood is not going to happen in the few seconds in those 3 positions from M to Bergen Coulee. There's no blood on the back of the headrest, which the most serious injuries are the back of the head. There's no blood on the headrest or the back of that seat. The only thing that might have come from what they call flailing or cast off was on the console, a few drops on the inside of that. Everything else, Mr. Salke testified, is consistent with impact. Little drops come out when you have a bloody nose or a bloody face, somebody hits you, spreads out droplets of blood on the inside of the windshield. The direction the force came from is where that blood would go. In other words, they're facing each other. He's hitting her with his left hand, she's fighting him, scratching his neck. Blood is being impacted against the inside of the windshield, the console, the radio, not from the right side. That's not where the force is coming from, and that's not where the blood is going. The dash did not have any damage to it, did not have a lot of blood on it, and again, someone sitting in the front passenger seat bending over, I don't believe would impact the dash. There's some scuff marks on the outside of the door, as if the door was closed at one point and she's held on the ground or her shoes are kicking at that door. One shoe is found inside the car, the other shoe is found far away. Her shoes are getting kicked off outside the car is all I can think of. There's no other reason for one shoe to be outside the car and the other shoe to be inside the car, where Mr. Kendhammer might have put it after the struggle. There's still some blood drops on the back rear tire. And you remember all the testimony about what happened to this car. It was towed in wet roads to a facility and then taken down to the crime lab. And there was still blood on the tire, even though that tire would have been spinning on wet roads. And there's still blood there. There was blood on the outside of the windshield, even though it was raining out, and again, it was taken to the elements. Where there was no blood, the ends of the pipe. The one piece of evidence that was actually protected by Captain Zimmerman with the tarp and taken inside, not towed anywhere, not on the elements. The pipe that had supposedly the most contact with her because it hit her and she was flailing around while it's in her, had no blood in the ends of it. Pipe never touched her. Pipe never went in her. There's blood where things are in the elements and are being moved, and there's not blood on the one thing where there should be blood. if you believe Mr. Kendhammer's story. He doesn't remember if he went in the trunk. There'd be no reason for him to open that trunk if his wife is needing CPR on the ground. But there's a piece of grass in the trunk. We know it was open there. There's a little bit of dirt on one end of the trunk. The FBI could not make any conclusions, which isn't surprising given how little there is, but it's worth a shot. The police tried. The rest of the trunk is clean. There's some scraping on the end of the trunk, consistent with the end of this pipe that has dirt on the outside of it. The pipe came from the trunk. There's DNA of Barb on both ends of the pipe. This is her trunk. This car she drives, her stuff is in there. Her DNA is all over that pipe. It should only be on one end. If the defendant's statements were true. So now, outside that car, she's already beaten, she's already been bleeding inside the car. Mr. Erler drives by. He doesn't see anybody or hear anybody. Todd's on top of her trying to keep her quiet. A hand over the mouth would cause the bruises on the inside being pressed against her teeth. It didn't come from a pipe, it didn't come from something hitting her. There's no lacerations or bruises on the outside of her lips, just the inside. Her cricoid cartilage is fractured from someone on her neck, holding her down, crushing it, smothering her. The marks on her neck from fingernail scratches of herself, trying to get him off of her, trying to claw at him. Her right hand has his DNA on her fingernails, not the left hand. You heard a lot of testimony about people holding hands in the hospital, but only the right hand had Mr. Kendhammer's DNA on the nails. There was also blood on the nails. This was a fight. Barb was not a woman that would walk around after breaking a nail at work and just leave it that way. It was broken during this struggle. The pipe was found outside in the grass, and as I said, it was covered. The pipe appeared to be wet on one end, the rest dry. This was not a pipe laying out in the elements. It would be wet all over. It was not a pipe that was on the back of someone's truck out in the elements. The whole thing would be wet. It was inside somewhere. One end was in the ground somewhere because it's wet and dirt is packed into it, but the rest was dry, laid in a trunk. Leave some dirt in the trunk. Leave some dirt on the scraping of the trunk. Goes through the windshield, deposits some dirt, gets thrown there, and that's why we don't find any blood on it. And that's why it's not wet. It wasn't out in the elements, laying on the road. So after all this, when you consider the witnesses that the state gave you, a number of people, Ben Paff, Mr. Logging, Mr. Heim, Mr. Erler, they have no stake in this. They have no reason to lie to you. There's no reason not to believe them. There's no reason to speculate to think maybe the sun was in somebody's eyes. There's no reason to think that they might be wrong about their testimony. The other people the state presented were professionals, law enforcement or crime lab. Can they make mistakes? They can make mistakes, sure. Can they all make the same mistakes, independent of each other? Not likely. The defense presented either friends and family of the defendant who don't want to believe the truth. It would be scary, it would be traumatic. I understand that. I can sympathize with that. But that's why we don't allow family members to sit on juries. They're not looking at it objectively. They're looking at it emotionally. Our job is to look at it objectively and find the truth. They don't want to know the truth, that's why they didn't even ask him. Where were you going? Why wasn't mom at work? They don't want to know the answers. And I understand that. The other witnesses the defense called were the expert witnesses that didn't add up with each other, didn't get things right in the report, and when they testified, got things flat out wrong, and in Mr. Mashulum's case, stretched it quite a bit. So the defense gave you a story that's proven to be lies in many different ways. The defendant's story is filled with either holes or not remembering or out-and-out lies and even lies to you during the trial. We've given you more than enough evidence to find that Barbara Kendhammer was beaten to death. It was not an accident. It did not come from a pipe that came through a window from a truck or otherwise. The injuries were intentionally inflicted by the defendant. These weren't accidents. They weren't just fooling around and got out of hand. And he intended to kill her by keeping her from getting help, hiding her from Mr. Erler, not calling 911, beating her head so hard she had skull fractures, then trying to orchestrate his story to cover the tracks, not giving medical personnel the true story of what happened. That all indicates his intent was that she die. Does that mean he never loved her? No. Does that mean he's scared of what he did? No. In many domestic violence situations, there's an incident and there's an apology. People say, I didn't mean to do that. Well, they meant to do it at the time. They might now regret doing it, but they meant to do it at the time. If you were to find him not guilty, you would have to believe he was a victim of not only an accident that defies physics and all the physical evidence, but a series of incompetent law enforcement officers, an incompetent medical examiner, and an incompetent crime lab. And his stories of looking for a truck that belonged to a person that he didn't know where he lived, and didn't know how he was going to get the truck are true, and that Barb, for some unknown reason, was going to be late to work for the first time ever on the same day that she happened to be killed. And that's ludicrous, and you should reject that as ludicrous. You should give Barbara what her husband will not, the truth about her death. He killed her, and he should be held accountable.
Thank you, Mr. Grinke.